Stamp 3D PT. For this, I'm going to actually make some hardtack with the cookie cutters I made in a previous video, link above. I'll include the links below to Townsend and Taste and History. So I made some hardtack earlier, and it looks kind of bad. The reason it looks kind of lumpy is because when I did it, I didn't flatten it out, and it was way too wet when I put it on the cookie sheet. To do this, you need your dough to be literally like Play-Doh consistency. So I'm going to do it again. This time, try and do it right according to all the instructions. To start, preheat your oven. I've seen about 200, and that worked really well. So go ahead and preheat your oven while you're getting everything all set up. For this, you'll need flour. And I've got a couple different kinds. Got this gluten-free flour, which I'll try, and from the last one I also have some just cheap general purpose flour, so I'm going to mix both and go from there. And for hardtack, the recipe is extremely simple. You need flour, salt, and a mixing bowl. Now for the ratio, it's about 1 cup flour to about ½ cup water. So in a second I'll start mixing this up. And salt. My first recipe was plain and dry as heck, so you need like a good tablespoon at least of salt. And you could use any salt you want. I just had this on hand. I don't know about adding other salts like garlic salt or anything like that, how that would affect the shelf life. But I'm going to go ahead and just start mixing this up in a second. So with the salt added to the flour, just stir that in a little bit. And for this, I'm just going to start, got about ½ cup water here. Just going to slowly add just enough to make a slurry at first, and then stir it up and go from there. Definitely make sure you scrape all the sides off. And this is one of those, you want it to be Play-Doh, not, this is way too creamy. But go ahead and take a minute, get it really stirred in. So right now, this is way too wet and lumpy. And I ran out of the original white flour, so I've got some just gluten-free general purpose flour here. So I'm going to pour in a little bit more, try and thicken it up. So that was less than, let's see, use about 3/4 cup of water. So you really want this as dry as possible. So I'm going to pour in some more flour, try and get this up to Play-Doh consistency and go from there. So this is getting close because it's starting to come off the spoon. So it still needs a little bit more. You shouldn't basically see any shiny wet spots in it. So keep working in a little bit. I'm at about 1.5 cups flour right now. So this is getting pretty close, but this is where I stopped last time and produced those ugly pucks. So I'm going to add just a touch. Use a highly scientific measuring method, and then keep working this in. So I spent about 20 minutes hand mixing and just keep pouring flour and mixing it in by hand. And the way to tell if it's done is if it doesn't stick to your hand, then it's definitely dry enough. So this is the Play-Doh consistency you want. And if you want, you can actually use this to make your own Play-Doh. And the stuff you buy at the store has some food coloring, and usually I think it's lemon juice added to it just as a preservative. Or you can do squishy circuits with this, and I'll include a link above here for my lessons on how to do that. So now that this is done, your cutter is next. So go ahead and make sure you wash this really well in hot soapy water, and I'll do that and then start cutting. So laid out a glob dough, just use the cutter here. Put a little bit of flour in the cutter. Press it in. So I'm going to repeat that, making a glob of dough, cut it, and put it out. And then I'm going to repeat that. I didn't print up a square cutter, but I could just make a square and stamp it with that, so do that next. Another method is just take a glob of dough, put it inside the cutter. Push it down. Pry it off. So that produces your round shape, and so a couple different ways you could do it. You could either stamp it after you cut it or stamp it inside the cut. Either way. So for the square one, I just smush some dough underneath and use the spatula just to cut off the edges. Press this in. So you can start seeing some of the logo details, and this might be too detailed for that. Try a couple more. So the square pieces need a little bit of work on the corners. Just work those in so they're not so sharp when I try and bite into them. But otherwise you can see how it's divided, and I'm going to get a fork and dock all this as well. So docking is just where you put a hole through, clean through it, and it keeps it from rising up in the center. But for the rest of this, you can see nice little hand-sized biscuits that would be great for soups or just storage. So I'm going to go ahead and maybe put this in the oven, get this started. So you do 200 degrees Fahrenheit for about 2 hours, and you want this as dry as possible. Take them out, let them cool, and then you put them in for another 2 hours. So here's the second batch. I noticed as I used this, the press got all gunked up, and it kept sticking to the different parts. So I ended up just cutting a couple just plain circles. So I'm gonna dock these with a fork, and then put them in the oven along with the first batch. So now these are ready. I'm going to put them in with the first batch, bake them for about 2 hours at 200 Fahrenheit, and then let them cool, do it again. So put them on top rack of your oven, 200 degrees for 2 hours, then cool, and then bake again. So biscuit actually comes from a French term, I believe, for twice baked. And you can see already that the tops of some of the round ones over here, the dough is a little bit on the wet side, so these might warp out a little bit. This first batch probably was a better consistency. So about an hour in, you can see they haven't browned or goldened up much, and from what I've seen, they generally won't change colors until the second time you bake them. So they've got about an hour to go. So here they are after 2 hours. Some of the first batch over here is a little more golden brown in the back. This side's still about the same color. So I'll go ahead and pull these, cool them off, and I'm just going to take them outside for a few minutes and cool them down and then come back. So after the first 2 hours. Some of these still a little soft in the center. So I flipped them over. And I'm just, it's pretty cold outside, so I'm just going to let them cool down out here for a little bit and then bring them back in, cook them up.